The world had shrunk to the smell of damp earth and the single, sharp scent of her own fear. For Alara, time was measured not in sunrises she could not see, but in the subtle shifts of temperature in the packed dirt beneath her cheek. Cold meant night had fallen on the prairie above. A suffocating warmth meant the relentless sun was beating down on the heavy cellar doors, trapping the heat in the shallow grave with her. Her husband, Jacob, had dug this cellar with his own hands, his sweat darkening the very soil that now held her prisoner. He had meant it to preserve life, potatoes, carrots, the fruits of their impossible labor. Now it was meant to extinguish hers. Her brother-in-law, Caleb, had thrown her in here after Jacob's fever took him. His words, rough and final as the scrape of the bolt, still echoed in the close dark. This land is mine now. A grieving widow is a burden I won't carry. Thirst was a living thing inside her, a creature with claws, tearing at her throat. Hunger was a dull ache that had long ago given way to a light-headed emptiness. Despair was the heaviest thing of all. It was the taste of dust in her mouth, the grit under her fingernails from her first frantic, useless attempts to claw at the wood. She had stopped screaming after the first day. The vast, indifferent sky had swallowed her cries, and the only audience was the prairie wind, which offered no comfort. She lay still, conserving what little remained of herself, her ear pressed to the earth. She listened to the skittering of mice, the deep thrum of the world she was no longer part of. Then, a new sound. Not Caleb's heavy, deliberate tread. This was different. The soft thud of hooves, tired and slow. A faint creak of leather. A silence. Alara's heart, a weak and fluttering bird in her chest, gave a painful lurch. Was it a traveler? A mirage conjured by a dying mind? She held her breath, every fiber of her being strained toward the sound. Footsteps, lighter than Caleb's, paced the ground directly above her. They stopped. A long pause stretched, taut and agonizing. She could imagine a man standing there, surveying the lonely homestead, the unmilked cow lowing pitifully in the pen, the dust gathering on the porch swing Jacob had built. He would see a place abandoned, a place of sorrow, and he would ride on. Hope was a foolish, dangerous thing. A scraping noise jolted her. Wood on wood. Not the bolt. Something else. A fumbling, a testing of the heavy doors. A grunt of effort. Then, a groan of stressed timber and a sudden, violent splintering of light that lanced into her darkness. It was blinding, a physical blow. She threw a weak arm over her eyes, shrinking back into the corner like a creature of the night. A silhouette blocked the new, raw square of sky, broad-shouldered, lean, a shape defined by the unforgiving sun at its back. He stood there for a moment, letting the gloom settle, letting her eyes adjust. She could see the worn brim of a hat, the stark line of a jaw. He said nothing. The silence was a question. He lowered himself into the opening, his movements economical and sure. The air shifted, bringing with it the scent of horse, leather, and open country. He was closer now, a looming form in the half-light. His eyes found hers. They were not cruel like Caleb's, nor were they filled with pity. They were steady, gray as a storm-threatened sky, and they took in everything. Her torn dress, the filth, the hollows of her face, the raw terror in her gaze. He knelt, not too close, and unhooked a canteen from his belt. The slosh of water was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. He uncapped it and held it out. His hand was calloused, steady. He did not speak, letting the offer stand on its own. For a long moment, she only stared, unable to reconcile this quiet act of grace with the brutality that had preceded it. Then, with a shuddering gasp, she crawled forward and took it. The water was life. It was a promise. It was everything. He remained a silent, watchful presence. His name, she learned, was Silas, and he offered it as he offered everything. Sparingly and only when necessary. After helping her from the cellar, her legs trembling and useless, he did not ride away. He made a small, neat camp near the cottonwood tree by the dry creek bed, a place from which he could see the house but did not intrude upon it. For 2 days, Alara existed in a haze of recovery, drifting in and out of a fevered sleep on her own porch. She was too weak to go inside, to face the disarray Caleb had left, the ghost of her husband in every chair. Silas tended to her with a detached sort of reverence. He brought her water, then a thin broth he simmered over his fire. He never asked what had happened. He did not need to. The story was etched onto her, in the bruises that shadowed her skin, in the way she flinched if he moved too quickly, in the raw, brutal fact of the cellar itself. Trust was not a decision. It was a slow, creeping dawn. It came in the quiet moments between his actions. She watched him from the porch, a wraith wrapped in a quilt. He moved with a purpose that soothed her fractured nerves. He mended a broken strap on his saddlebags, his fingers deft and patient. He spoke to his horse in a low murmur, a gentle cadence that was the only softness in him. He repaired the latch on her chicken coop, his movements efficient, expecting no thanks. He was a man accustomed to solitude, a man who understood that some things were too heavy for words. His silence was a balm, a stark contrast to Caleb's loud, possessive anger. His stillness gave her the space she needed to breathe. On the third day, she found the strength to walk into her home. The inside was a violation. Caleb had torn through their life, searching for the small savings Jacob had hidden. Drawers were upended, linen strewn across the floor. A chair lay on its side with a broken leg. The cold hearth felt like a final death. Overwhelmed, she stumbled back outside, the grief a fresh, physical blow. Silas saw her from his camp. He did not come to her, but later, as dusk painted the plains in shades of bruised purple, he walked to the house carrying the splintered chair. He said nothing, simply set it down, and returned to his fire with a piece of wood and a knife. She watched him that evening, the firelight catching the focused lines of his face as he carved a new leg for the chair. He was restoring one small piece of her broken world, and in doing so, he was telling her she was not entirely alone in the wreckage. That night, she joined him by his fire. She sat on a log opposite him, pulling her quilt tighter. The flames danced between them, a fragile warmth against the immense, star-dusted dark. "He'll come back," she said, her voice raspy from disuse. It was the first time she had spoken of it. Silas looked up from the piece of wood he was smoothing, his gray eyes catching the light. He nodded once, a short, sharp movement. I know. The quiet acknowledgement hung in the air. He knew, and he was still here. For the first time since Jacob's death, a feeling other than fear began to stir within her. It was a fragile thing, brittle as a winter leaf, but it was there. It was the seed of resolve. This was her home. She would not be driven from it again. The air grew heavy 2 days later, the sky turning a sullen, bruised yellow. A storm was coming, and with it Caleb. He rode in on a lathered horse, his face a thundercloud of rage. He reined in sharply, dust billowing around him, his eyes immediately finding Alara on the porch. Then his gaze snagged on Silas, who was standing near the well, a bucket in his hand. Silas did not move. He simply stood there, his presence a quiet, unyielding challenge. Caleb swung down from his horse, his boots hitting the ground with aggressive force. "What is this?" he boomed, his voice carrying the familiar cruelty that made Alara's stomach clench. "Who is this vagrant you've let onto my property?" Silas placed the bucket down deliberately on the edge of the well. He turned his body slowly to face Caleb, his posture relaxed but utterly solid. He was a stone in a river, something the current would have to break against. Alara felt the old fear rise, cold and slick, but something else rose with it, the memory of Silas's quiet competence, the warmth of the broth he'd made, the sight of him mending her chair. She pushed herself to her feet, her hands gripping the porch railing until her knuckles were white. Caleb's eyes, burning with possessive fury, dismissed Silas and fixed on her. "Get back in the house, Alara. We have things to settle. This land is mine. You are on it by my good grace, and that's run out." "This is not your land," she said. The words were a tremor, barely audible, but they were hers. Caleb laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. The law says different. Jacob is gone. You are nothing here. He took a step toward the porch. Silas moved. It was not a large movement, just a single step to the side that placed him squarely between Caleb and the porch steps. He still had not spoken a word. His silence was more intimidating than any threat. You best move aside, drifter, Caleb snarled, his hand inching toward the pistol at his hip. This is family business. Silas's gaze never left Caleb's face. She ain't your family, he said, his voice low and flat. And this ain't your business. The world seemed to hold its breath. The wind picked up, whipping dust into spirals around the three of them. Caleb's face contorted with fury. He was a man used to getting his way through bluster and fear. He was not accustomed to being met with a wall of sheer, immovable will. He looked from Silas's implacable face to Alara, standing on the porch, and he saw not the broken woman he had thrown into the cellar, but someone else. Someone who was drawing strength from the quiet man standing before her. Her chin was lifted. Her eyes, though fearful, held a spark of defiance he had never seen before. It was that spark that defeated him. He could face a man, but he could not face the sudden, unexpected union of two resilient souls. With a frustrated curse, he spat on the ground. "This isn't over," he growled, grabbing his horse's reins. "I'll be back with the sheriff. You'll see." He mounted and spurred his horse away, leaving a cloud of angry dust in his wake. The storm broke that night, a furious deluge that washed the air clean. Alara and Silas sat inside the small house, the repaired chair now in its rightful place. The sound of the rain on the roof was a roaring comfort. The immediate threat had passed, but its echo remained. Caleb's final words were a promise. He would be back, and the law, in this part of the country, often sided with the man who had the loudest voice and the heaviest fist. They existed in this new quiet for another day, a space of unspoken understanding. Silas patched the roof where the storm had found a weakness. Alara cooked a proper meal with the last of her flour and the eggs she had gathered. They ate at the small table, the silence no longer fraught with tension, but filled with a kind of shared gravity. They were two solitary people who had, by chance, found a brief harbor in one another. The next morning, under a sky scrubbed clean and pale, Silas packed his bedroll and saddled his horse. Alara watched him from the doorway, her heart a heavy, aching weight in her chest. He was a drifter. He had to move on. It was his nature. She had expected this. She had been preparing for it. But the finality of his movements, the practiced efficiency of his departure, felt like an abandonment all the same. He had given her back her strength, only to leave her alone to wield it. He finished his work and turned, his gray eyes finding hers across the dusty yard. He looked at her, then at the small, lonely house, then back at her. He walked toward the porch, stopping at the bottom step. "He'll keep coming back," Silas said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. "He'll wear you down, or he'll bring others." Alara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She wrapped her arms around herself. "This ain't a life," he continued, his voice quiet but firm, carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "It's a waitin' game, waiting for the next bad thing to happen." He looked past her, at the horizon vast and empty and full of hard miles. Then his gaze returned to her, and it held a new intensity, a depth she hadn't seen before. It was the look of a man making a decision that would alter his own course as much as hers. He had found her imprisoned in a cellar, a victim of another's cruelty. He would not leave her imprisoned by this land, a victim of circumstance. He took a breath. "I'm taking you home." The words hung in the clean air. Home. It was a place she no longer had, a concept that felt as distant as the moon. She knew he did not mean a house with a hearth and curtains. He meant a direction, a journey, a future that was not this. He was offering not a rescue, but a partnership, an escape born of shared hardship and quiet respect. A profound sense of release washed over her, so potent it almost brought her to her knees. The homestead, once her dream, was now a monument to pain and loss. Leaving it was not defeat. It was survival. It was choosing life. She looked into his steady, serious eyes and gave a single, decisive nod. She turned, went inside the house that was no longer hers, and gathered the few things that mattered. A photograph of her and Jacob, her mother's thin silver locket, and a spare loaf of bread. When she returned to the porch, she had left the ghost of the woman Caleb tried to bury behind her. She walked down the steps, not as a widow, not as a victim, but as a Lara. And together, they turned their backs on the past and rode north, into the vast, uncertain promise of the dawn.